So Rima, no one has signed in the last minute or so.
Okay, so is this a good time to get going then?
I think we're good.
Let's do it. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm very honored to be hosting this community meeting on fighting hate in the East End, along with my colleague, Peter Tabuns, who's the MPP for Toronto Danforth. I'm Rima Berns-McGown. I'm the MPP for Beaches East York, and also the official opposition critic for poverty and homelessness. And I'm a proud member of Ontario's first Black Caucus, along with Laura May Lindo, Jill Andrew, Kevin Yard, and Faisal Hassan. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. These are incredibly difficult conversations. They are hard to have. They certainly put a knot in many people's stomachs for many reasons. And I'm grateful to all of you for being here, and to those of you who have who are willing to speak to the questions that that we in community have to being here and to be willing to answer those questions. I am going to explain how this is going to go and tell you all who's on the call, but I do want to begin with a land acknowledgement, which is more important now than ever. We are, of course, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and it's land that is still inhabited by many, many Indigenous people, First Nations and Métis. And this is really important to consider right now in this particular instance. I think it's profound to remember that we are in the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. And what's so beautiful about that treaty is that it speaks to, if I can ask everybody to mute themselves, please, if you're not speaking, that would be amazing. It's the Dish with One Spoon Treaty speaks to cooperation and mutual aid and benefit. It's a really powerful and beautiful treaty where everybody takes what they need and only what they need, and gives as much and gives with everything that they have. And you'll notice that it's a dish with one spoon and there are no knives. But I think it's also important that we recognize that this is land that has been desecrated by colonization and by violence aimed first at Indigenous peoples and then also at Black people who were also enslaved here. That's not a story that we learn in our history, and it's a story that we need to learn. The wound is deep, the healing needs to be deep. I want to begin as well by saying that symbols matter, and symbols themselves can be violent and terrifying. In the case that we're here to talk about, 2 nooses were found very strategically placed at the Ellis Dawn construction site, which is building the new wing of the Michael Garron Hospital. And this was targeted, and in that sense, a demonstrable hate crime. The nooses, of course, are symbols of lynching. And just in case anybody doesn't know this history, it's important to understand that between 1882 and 1968, 4,743 lynchings occurred in the United States, as far as we know, and this is from the NAACP's data. Of these people who were lynched, the vast majority, 3,446, were Black, and the white folks who were lynched for either helping Black people or for not wanting lynchings to occur. The main reason that lynchings occurred is that once Black people had been given their freedom, many white people felt that Black people who were free were getting away with too much freedom and they needed to be controlled. And that is a direct quote from the NAACP. The point here, and it is absolutely crucial to understand, is that nooses are assertions of the right to vigilante violence that is intended to maintain white supremacy. And by white supremacy, I mean the structures that keep privilege for white people. And that privilege inevitably means that white people have more of everything, including quality of life and ease at getting those things, and also the value to have their lives valued. And the same white supremacy also keeps Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people at a lower point where they have less and they are less valued, so that life actually remaining alive is harder for them in every way. But the main thing that I want to say here is that it is easy to hate hate, and it is easy to stand up against hate. It is much, much harder to do the hard work of changing the systems that continue to harm and kill Black and Indigenous people. In the wake recently, most recently, because we could read names for a very long time, of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and the deaths recently of DeAndre Campbell, Regis Korchinski Paquette, Jamal Francisque, and Ijaz Choudhury at the hands of or in the presence of police here in the GTA, as well as the Devontae Miller verdict, we have heard enormous calls and demonstrations for massive change to those systems. We can pick on every level of government. No one is immune. I don't mean this in a partisan way, but just yesterday we saw the police budget in Toronto actually increase, not decrease, which actually means less money for social programs, housing, and mental health supports we desperately need, despite the clarion call from community for a redistribution of resources away from policing and into the other things that we so desperately need. In Ontario, we've seen the Anti-Racism Directorate gutted, housing and mental health budget slashed. We've seen the Premier first deny our history of systemic racism and then toss a paltry $1.5 million, less than the value of many houses in the beach, at all of Ontario's Black communities to recover from COVID, knowing that the pandemic has hit Black and other racialized communities especially hard. Federally as well, of course, we have a long, long way to go in so many areas, especially with regard to the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action, the RCMP, and on and on. We need to listen to Black and Indigenous communities when they tell us loudly and clearly that the status quo isn't working. And we need to listen when they say we need a massive redistribution of resources and a system redesign from the bottom up. And just a final thought before I tell you how this is going to roll out and pass it on to Peter. This is deeply personal for me. I come from South Africa, from a mixed Jewish and Cape-colored background. My parents came to Canada to get away from apartheid when I was 4. My extended Cape-colored family was destroyed by apartheid and deeply affected by the struggle in the Western Cape. Decades after the official end of apartheid, white supremacy still reigns in so many ways. Here, as well as there, white supremacy is the scourge we have to fight. Hate is only its most obvious manifestation. So let's get to the program. In addition to Peter and me, there are a number of people who are going to answer our opening questions and then are here to answer yours. Marlon Wesley is one of the welders who found the nooses. We have Zara Denani, who's here from Old School General Store in East York. She's going to head up the community part of this towards the end. We have counselors Paula Fletcher and Brad Bradford. We have Police Superintendent Ruben Strobel, Ellis Dawn CEO Jeff Smith, and MGA Michael Guerin Hospital CEO Sarah Downey. And we are so grateful to all of you for making the time and being here. It means so much to everybody. Peter is going to make some opening remarks and then further introductions and let you know who else, some other folks who are on the call. And then we will begin by hearing some thoughts from Marlon Wesley. And then Peter and I will ask some questions to kick us off and give some of our participants an opportunity to make some opening statements. Then we look forward to answering your questions. Again, this was in the email that you were sent, but if you have questions while the event is unfolding, please use the email address that was sent to you in the same email as the link to tonight's event. And embedded in the email, there's an email to my constituency office. Please use that email to ask questions, and they'll be passed on to Peter and to me, and we'll ask as many as we can. And then we're going to use the last half hour to discuss community and community's thoughts and demands and healing. And we'll pass it on to Zara Danani of Old School to get us started off there. And then turn back to your questions on that part of the program. So thanks so very much. Peter, over to you.
Rima, thanks very much for that introduction, and my gratitude to all of you for being part of this meeting this evening. We're learning as we go, so my apologies to any and all of you if you find that occasionally things don't hold together as well as they should. As Rima said, we're going to have a few people, Sarah Downey from Michael Garron Hospital, Jeff from Ellis Don, but I also wanted to note that Councillors Paula Fletcher and Brad Bradford will be commenting briefly as well before we get into questions. I want to note the presence because there are quite a few people here and we didn't want to have all panel. We want to have the audience, you, the participants, to have more time. I wanted to note the presence of MPs Julie DeBrusen and Nathaniel Erskine Smith. I understand trustees Story and Arts have joined us as well. Mike York, who's president of the Carpenters District Council Ontario, and Chris Campbell similarly has joined us. I also want to note to everybody that this issue has not simply floated away quietly. We've had very strong statements of support for the Black community and against hate that have been issued by, excuse me, folks, if people could mute if you could mute, it would help tremendous.
Peter, now you're muted.
Am I back on? There's a very effective control that mutes all, including me. So I'll go back. Canadian Construction Association, Residential Construction Council of Ontario, Daniels Corporation, and Govan Brown have all come out in condemnation of what happened and asking and supporting action against it. I am not going to go into a history of racism and response to it in this community. People know we fought and drove the Klan out of this community back in 1980. We've had strong support in this community for the Muslim community and for our Jewish community when there have been attacks on those communities in other parts of North America. We've had substantial anti-hate initiatives, and we've had just an ongoing, before this incident, incidents of harassment. A young Muslim woman a few weeks ago was harassed on Cosburn Avenue, just walking down the street, living her life, when some hate-filled older guy pulled up his car and just verbally harassed her. We've had a long history of fighting against racism successfully. We aren't going to stop that fight. We know, unfortunately, racism is going to go away, not going away tomorrow anyway. But if we mobilize, if we pull the community together, we can have a big impact. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rima for the first introduction. Rima?
Thanks so very much, Peter. So we'd like to begin with by hearing from Marlon Wesley. Marlon, I think that people will really benefit immensely from hearing your take, both on the nooses that were found and also your sense of how that affects the job site. So over to you, Marlon. And
Well,
thank you again so much for being here tonight.
yeah, no problem. And I hope everyone can hear me well. Yes, is that yes? Everyone can hear me properly? All right, thumbs up.
It's a yes.
Yeah, it was a very unfortunate situation that's happened on site about 2.5 weeks ago. It's affected me quite a bit. It's a very demoralizing and demeaning thing. It was more like the shock of it, I would say, during the atmosphere that we're in today, with what's going on. Like somebody would do that. I was trying to figure out any reason whatsoever as to why someone would do that, or even maybe there's a practical reason as to why somebody would tie this noose. But as I am trained in hoisting and rigging, and so is everybody else that I work with, that knot is not taught to you in any sort of rigging course that I've taken over the years. So it was done on purpose. Maybe it was done to be funny, I'm not sure, but it's definitely not funny, as we all know. But really what it does is it creates a big division between the men on site. And because you have a mix of men on site of all different backgrounds, white, black, you know, everything, right? And we're all young guys and we all get along really well. And when something like this happens, it kind of forces the question in anybody in people's minds, like who else thinks like this? And it kind of just creates this, what can I say, this unsurety, you know, with people that you have to rely on every day. Like anything can happen on site, you know, it's a construction site and you have to rely on these men day in and day out, every single day, men and women. And, you know, it's, this stuff, it just destroys that. It destroys the camaraderie, if that makes sense. And swastikas, nooses, you know, N-word in earshot, anti-Semitic things in earshot. It's been on site for years. You know, this is not the first time I've had this conversation, not by a long shot. So it's just something that has gone on for a long time, and it's known. People know about it. It's not like this is not known, right? I'm just happy to see that bigger steps are now being taken to combat it and to create awareness, because that's what it really is. It's just people just don't know. For example, like my foreman, when he heard about it, like he came to me, he was like, I don't understand the relevance in all this. And I explained it to him, and then I sent him a couple of documentary videos so he could watch for himself, just so he could get a grips on it. If he's a foreman, you know, if he's going to be in charge of people, you got to be able to recognize some of these symbols and some of these things that people say. So it's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt to combat it, but all of this that I'm seeing here now is very good. The support that I got after the fact was absolutely crucial. I would say in my well-being and how I thought about the whole thing. I was completely supported from start to finish in support groups, counseling, and just to lend an ear, just you know, just someone to talk to. That was all there for me. And you know, I really have to thank, you know, Modern Niagara and Ellis Don for really stepping up to the plate on a level that, you know, I have not seen before. So I'm grateful for that. So that's a big benefit and big plus, big step forward, I think. And just people really genuinely curious as to how they could do better has really made a big difference, you know, in my opinion anyway. And the opinion on the men on site, because I've been speaking with them and what's been happening and all that. And, you know, we're all very happy that the steps have been taken, that were taken, have been taken. And because it's a difficult thing, and the gravity of it all is huge, you know, regardless outside of George Floyd and what's going on outside. It's a big issue, and it's a sensitive issue. And I want you to know that it affects people. It affects people every day. I shouldn't have to go into work and see a swastika or hanging noose. Nobody should, you know. It's not fair for someone like myself who's been a licensed tradesman since I was 17 years old. So, you know, anyway, I'm grateful that everybody's here and everybody put this together and we're having this conversation. I was quite nervous, to tell you the truth, about talking about it. But I think it's important for me to talk about it and be a little uncomfortable if it means some good's going to come out of it. So thank you guys for your time, and thanks for listening to my story.
Thank you so very much, Marlon. That was really, really profound and important. Thank you for sharing. So my first question is for you, Superintendent Strobel. Can you let us know, you know, how are the police investigating? Have you laid charges? How is that rolling out, and how soon do you think you'll be able to do that? I think everybody would agree that it's a hate crime, and I think everybody feels strongly that I think one of the things that was profound about what Marlon Wesley was saying was that this isn't a one-off, that it's been happening for a while, and it's perhaps not always reported, but this one has been. So I think many people would feel that if the charges were laid, it would discourage this from happening. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me today. I got to tell you, two things. First of all, I'm very impressed with the amount of people that have joined this chat, which is a very important discussion on racialized issues. I find when we have community meetings, when I have many town hall meetings, and I can tell you both counselors can attest to this, when we have these meetings, I can probably sometimes count on one hand how many people actually show up. You know, when you think about the work that goes involved in trying to set community meetings up to talk about important issues dealing with crime and disorder within our communities. So being here today and seeing 152 people present and around the table to collectively have a discussion on this issue, to me is very enlightening, and I'm happy about it. And I just want to say, Marlon, thank you for, you know, talking about your feelings and keeping it within that context. I think it really puts it into context what we're really talking about in the effect that racism has on people, which is very important. And other people have to really start knowing and understanding what that effect is. And I think we've gone too long where people don't really truly understand the impact that this type of behavior has on racialized people, or any people of color, in any type of history that has meaningful symbols that represent you know, discrimination and racism. Before I get into the other issue, what I would also like to say, I think where we are today as a society, I think we've hit a tipping point. And I think, again, it goes back to what Marlon had said about getting people to understand what has been going on, you know, literally for centuries. And people really don't sometimes get it. And now people are starting to listen and open their mind up to what is actually being said and trying to make things better. So for that, I think we're in a good place. And as we move forward, you know, not just in the policing context, but every context within our society. This is not just a policing issue. It is a social issue that touches every single institution. And we as a society represent all of those institutions. So again, thank you for everybody for inviting me, and I'll answer your question. So from a policing perspective, just to, before I talk, I've got Andy Johnstone, who's my detective sergeant. He's in charge of 55 Division's Criminal Investigations Bureau. I also have Karen Basila, Scott Purchase, and Shannon Dawson, who've also logged in. And Karen, Scott, and Shannon are all part of our intelligence unit. They oversee our hate crimes unit, which is a special unit within the Toronto Police Service. And their primary function is to designate and coordinate with Crown attorneys in relation to hate-related types of crime. So when we talk about criminal offenses, if there is an underlying hate bias, this unit will overlook and follow the investigation, be a part of the investigation, so we can get that specialized designation through the Crown's office. So when it goes to court, it has extra penalties associated to it in relation to its seriousness before the court. So it's an important designation that needs Crown attorney consent. And I just want to let everybody know that we, as a police service, not only take what has happened to Marlon and the nooses that were tied and left in plain view, we take it very seriously, and we are investigating it as a threatening, which is the official charge that is laid before the courts if there is an arrest to be made or the investigation is actually a threatening. But again, we have sought the permission to take it to a more serious level, in which we've attached a hate crime or to the offense of threatening. So just to back up, back on June, police were called at approximately 12:30 p.m. Apparently this happened, I think, at first thing in the morning, 6 o'clock, when workers were coming on site and found 2 nooses. And subsequent to that, police being notified, we immediately started an investigation. I have a detective by the name of Sanjay Sharma, who's our lead investigator, who has taken the time to investigate and interview as many workers as possible who have access to the site. And it's important that this can be a very complex investigation because we don't have a smoking gun. It'd be nice in a perfect world to say to everybody here, yeah, we're going to make an arrest tomorrow. But there's a lot of moving parts to this, especially when we don't have an eyewitness, nor do we have any video of the event. So it becomes more challenging for us to dig through the information, dig through all the evidence. And I think more importantly, interviewing people and building a case. So as you all know, Ellis Dawn with Michael Garron Hospital immediately issued a press release in relation to the incident because this happened on their work site in their place of employment, initially as an employer-employee situation and investigation, and in keeping with Bill 168 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, where an employer has a responsibility to ensure the workplace is free from violence and harassment. So Ellis Dawn and Michael Garron Hospital have a joint responsibility here. And again, listening to Marlon and knowing what I know from my investigators, they have been actively working with us to ensure not only the workplace is free from violence and harassment, but also I got to thank them for assisting us in carrying out our investigation and giving us ease of information, whether it be video or document information, to help us do a quality, detailed, intense investigation. So at this point, I don't want to get too much further into the investigation because it's still a live investigation. We have released another press release on June the 26th. And basically, we're asking for any help from the public who may have information that can assist us in identifying who is responsible for making these nooses and hanging them. And based on the results that we get from that, we're hoping that will advance our investigation. So, like I said, we take these things very seriously. They are time consuming, and sometimes they do take time to actually solve and come to a conclusion. So I hope that answers your question in relation to the investigation.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. I will go on to our next panelist, Mr. Jeff Smith, CEO of Ellis Dawn. Mr. Smith, thanks very much for being here this evening, and thank you for reaching out to the workers and taking steps to support them. I guess people would like to know what Ellis Dawn is doing about this incident, but also if you can speak to us about how you plan to address the larger issue that's been raised, that although this may be particularly horrendous, and it is, but unfortunately it seems like it's an ongoing issue, not just in your workplace, but in the sector.
Thanks very much, Peter. Just everybody allow me to introduce myself. My name's Jeff Smith, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight to talk to all of you and hopefully to answer any questions that you have. I said to one person who emailed me, by the time this meeting is over, you won't know everything, but you'll certainly know everything I know. I just want to let everybody know that I'm not the only representative of Ellis Dawn here tonight. I won't list them all. There are 7 or 8. I just keep getting texts from people saying I'm on the line, but Paul Trudell, who's head of our People and Culture Department, is on. Jennifer Kahn, who's the director of our Inclusive Diversity team, is on. Samuel Ajobo, who's an estimator that works for us, but is becoming an emerging voice at Ellis Dawn over the last few weeks, and who, frankly, I find to be particularly wise. Anyway, an emerging voice around the anti-Black racism discussions is on. He may pipe in at some point, and a few other people. We are taking this incident and broader situation. So, Peter, and I appreciate that you put it in that context very, very, very seriously, because let me cut to the chase. For me and for so many of us at Ellis Dawn, and for me particularly, it's been a time of shock. And while Marlon, I hope you won't be offended by me saying this, because I know the trauma that you went through was so much more direct and intense, but we've been traumatized as a company to some extent. And I told Marlon earlier, and I've been around 35 years, I've never heard of a noose on a job site before. And so what's happened to me and to Ellis Dawn in the last 2 or 3 weeks is I have been educated. I've been educated by Marlon. I've been educated by Samuel. I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've been educated by others. This racism in the construction industry, I won't talk about society. I don't have that expertise. I barely, as you will see, have the expertise to talk about the construction industry. Is a much bigger problem, frankly, than I had understood. So when this happened 2 weeks ago, we immediately leapt into action, me thinking that it was a unique one-time event, because that's what I thought. So we immediately stopped work. We did a stand down on the site. We made sure the message was clear that that we were going to investigate the incident, that we wanted anybody with any information to come forward, that there would be zero tolerance towards this kind of racism on an ongoing basis, etc. We made the message as strong as we possibly could. We hired our own investigative team in cooperation, as Superintendent Strobel said. They're working closely together. We made employee assistance help available for anybody who wanted it. And we started developing, and we'll continue to develop messaging. I know you've done your broader messaging at the hospital, which has been terrific over the weekend, but we're thinking more specifically to this job site and to all of our job sites, how to get that messaging and that education out there. So we did all that. We talked about security. We reviewed. It's a very safe site with a really great record. But obviously, we're going to take another look at in the process, take another look at our security measures and what we're doing. Video is tough. It's tough to get video everywhere on a site that is constantly changing and constantly growing and moving. it's almost organic construction site, but we're looking at that. But Peter, to get back, I guess, to your question, it's a, as I said, I'm learning, and I was talking with Marlon earlier today, and he said, Jeff, this isn't a unique incident. This happens on too many job sites, too often, and for too many years. And that's the way that we've got to address this problem. So I can tell you with great determination what we're doing, what we're planning, how we're going to work together as an industry. I'll get to that in just a second. And I realize that the proof will be in the pudding, but as Superintendent Strobel said, hopefully we're at a tipping point where the communication with the learning is happening with people like me, and steps will be taken. We had actually formed, we've got an inclusive diversity group that is broader at Ellis Don. It's been in place for a few years. It reports directly to our board. We formed an anti-Black racism group. I didn't. It was a grassroots thing that came up just a few weeks ago, but before the incidents at the hospital, really arising out of the George Floyd murder and the protests. Okay, what can we do? Let's start talking about it. That had already happened, and that is ongoing at Ellis Don, and we are going to broaden that now to the industry. And I said to Marlon earlier today, this is a very intelligent guy. I'd really like to have him directly involved in that. I've reached out to, I don't want to say all the union leaders, but a great number of union leaders, and the support has been universal. Some of you have seen that in the media, not just to Modern Niagara, who is Marlon's employer, but to a big number of subcontractors. And of course, I hope it goes without saying, but I can tell you that everybody is appalled by what is happening. And I've also talked to the government. I've talked to, as well as the people on this phone call, I've talked to Monty McNaughton and some others. We're developing our messaging. We'll work on our communication. It's an education issue, and it's an intolerant. It's a zero tolerance of intolerance issue. So the feedback I've been getting from people, the Black employees that we have, and people like Marlon, is let's use this as positively as we can, and instead of fomenting a lot of anger, let's use it as a time to teach, to communicate, and to fix things. And that is going to take a while, but that's the approach we're taking. Two more things, and then I'll leave it for any questions or maybe later. At Ellis Don, I really don't want this to be a top-down thing where the CEO, a guy like me who clearly has a lot to learn, starts saying, okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. We are going to make it a company-wide thing, and I'm going to be told what to do, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to learn, and a broad group at Ellis Don will come together for our group in Indian. So it's going to be, I don't want to use buzzwords, but bottom up. Top down isn't going to work here. And the last thing is, and you'll see it in the newspaper, I didn't mean to leave this till the last, but it's out there. You know, since this incident of Michael Guerin, there have been other news on other job sites. And so I don't know to what extent this is indicative of a really very grave problem. I'm hopeful and optimistic that it's some copycat, frankly, idiots out there. But I can tell you, we are all, as an industry, including the police, including our clients, taking this extremely seriously, and we're not going to rest until we figure out how to beat it. And I guess those are my comments, subject to anything anybody would like to ask me or educate me on.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Rima?
Thank you so very much, Jeff. So next, I'd like to turn to Sarah Downey. Sarah is, of course, the CEO of Michael Guerin Hospital. And Sarah, I want to begin by thanking you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure on behalf of all of community, for the incredible and outstanding work you have done during COVID. I know that must have been among the most stressful episodes of your entire life. And I really think that you should feel very proud. I think the hospital has done an extraordinary job of managing things and keeping people safe and keeping people alive, and being really proactive too in terms of understanding where the particular neighborhoods have been in the area where there have been particular problems with COVID, and getting out there and getting testing to people, and trying to be proactive in terms of getting PPE, and being proactive in terms of getting people to understand how important masking is and all of the other stuff. So really, thank you very much. I know as well that it's really a hallmark of everything you've done has been to try your best to reach out to community and be here as a community hospital. So I appreciate that this was horrifying to you to see it happening on a site that is intended to be a site of healing for the next many, many decades. So I guess the question is, you know, how do you foresee healing the site that in turn is going to heal? And then I know that you have a lot of Black folks working at the hospital in all sorts of capacities. I'm sure it was really difficult for them, and I wonder if you could speak to how you've been reaching out to keep them safe as well.
So thank you for that, and it's thank you for organizing this really important forum to talk about such a, as you say, at times difficult and heartbreaking situation that we've had on our construction site at Michael Garron Hospital. Let me start by saying that diversity is our strength at Michael Garron Hospital, and I'm deeply saddened and enraged that this terrible incident actually happened on our construction site. And that I'm really thankful to our partners at Ellis Dawn and their many subcontractors for acting so swiftly and taking it so seriously to try to identify who the perpetrator is and to help Marlon and his other colleague feel safe in workplaces. And I'm heartened that Jeff Smith, whom I know, of course, is taking this message and spreading it around his many job sites across the country. Ellis Dawn is a superb builder of hospitals, and we're really lucky in the East End of Toronto that Ellis Dawn will build our new, is in the process of building our new patient care tower. It'll be 8 stories with 4 levels of underground parking, an incredibly challenging task. And if anybody's been by Coxwell and Salmon lately, you will see just how impressive our future facility is. But also to say how sad I am in the place that will offer healthcare that such a terrible incident has happened. And as I said, diversity is our strength. You know, our workforce looks just like, in fact, there's probably many people on this call tonight who either work at Michael Garron or have family members who work at Garron or have been patients of Michael Garron. And our workforce genuinely reflects the population and diversity of our incredible communities in East Toronto. And Michael Garron has a long and proud history with Indigenous peoples, and many of you may have been with us while we celebrated the opening of a sweat lodge on our property, on their land last summer. We have Indigenous spaces within our facility. We have a long and strong history with LGBTQ communities. We offer cultural training to our staff in all kinds of areas. And we, like Ellis Dawn and many organizations, I'm sure on this call or your own companies, started our path towards being sure that we support anti-Black racism within our organization in partnership with our Black employees, and be very clear in our commitment to grow and develop, and if there are any systemic issues, racist issues, that we get at them. And then thank you, Zara, and the many people on the phone. You have wrapped our site with beautiful art, healing art, and as what always happens in East Toronto, incredible support for your local hospital. You know, as tough as these times have been, for sure, in the last 105 days with COVID, we feel the love of our community within our hospital, and now we see it every day as we drive by to see your incredible art. and positive messages around our site. And so there are a number of things planned to help heal the site, because in a year and a half, Jeff Smith will hand me a virtual key to this superb new facility. And it needs to be full of positive vibes and warmth and all the good things that Michael Guerin does every day to try to keep people well. And so a number of things are planned. I know that there is a community group who is talking about, doing some smudging and continuing their efforts to bring positive vibes to our site. And at the end of the month, with our own Indigenous elder, we are planning a sacred blessing. Before we actually broke ground on this construction project, the land was blessed by our own elder, Little Brown Bear. And he will be coming back, and with Jeff's permission, we'll smudge the workers who wish to be smudged. We'll smudge the site. We'll do a sacred pipe ceremony, and we will heal the site with various other community partners in East Toronto. In the end, this will be our place of healing. It's an important light on this construction project, but we're really proud to work with Ellis Dawn to be able to make sure that it's safe for their workers inside that organization. And I think, Rima, you asked me a bit about what we did to support our own Black and Indigenous workers within our organization. When it happened, of course, it's a separate discrete construction site, if you've seen it. And especially during COVID, there's been very little mixing of construction workers into our hospital. They have a pretty distinct site. We made sure that supports were made available to anybody who felt through our EAP, or Employee and Family Assistance Program, to remind workers of that. We do touch bases with our workers just to be sure they're feeling okay through their managers and leaders, and which we've been doing anyway around anti-Black racism, is to touch base with people, make sure they're feeling safe and secure in their workplace. And so we've been, I think, pretty proactive in our messaging internally to our staff. As soon as we knew it had happened, we let the staff know so they wouldn't read about it in the media. And I've also released an open letter to the public this afternoon on our thoughts on it and the path forward. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Sarah, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I'd like to have our two counselors speak if they could. I'll ask Paula Fletcher first and then Brad Bradford. And may I say, I just want to thank both of them for their very proactive response to the issue before us. And with that, Councillor Fletcher, if you'd like to speak.
Thank you very much, Peter. And it's so good to see so many EastEnders on this call tonight, or in this meeting tonight. Over 160 people. And also see that Saria Ibrahim from Regent Park is on this call, and she was one of people on the street about a noose that was found on a job site there. So this is not an unrelated or single incident. After this shocking incident at the hospital, had many calls from many of you that are on this line tonight saying, can we please have a meeting? Can we please talk about this? So Peter and Rima, thank you very much for putting this together. And I'm so sad that the Ministry of Labor is not here on this call, because this is a dangerous workplace. Marlon, I want to thank you for being on this call and meeting you tonight. It means a lot to me to hear your story. This is no longer just a story about Michael Guerin and a noose. Marlon, this is your story and how it's affected you. And when you said, well, I go to work, I'm working on a dangerous, potentially dangerous place. How can I trust those people I'm working with to look after me? That struck me very deeply. And I'm very concerned that the Ministry of Labor is not on this call, unless, Peter, they happen to have joined after that. And also, I just want to quote you again, Marlon. You said, I hope some good is going to come of it. Well, I just say it must be so. We must make it so. Thank you, everybody. We'll continue to work as a community.
Thank you, Paula. And just before we go to Councillor Bradford, just a reminder that if you have questions or comments that you want to send in, you were given an email address when you were given the link for the Zoom meeting. So please send us a question and Rima and I will be reading them out. And with that, Councillor Bradford.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Rima, for bringing us all together tonight. the response from the community speaks to how much this matters to us. It's overwhelming. It's heartwarming. I think it leaves me feeling hopeful, but it also, it's also scary because we recognize that this stuff happens far too often. And certainly as Peter opened up there and gave a description, there's a history of this in the East End, but there's also a history of pushing back. And so the fact that so many folks have rallied and called for this meeting and called for action, we hear that, and that's really important. Old schools and the artivism that's now around Michael Guerin, it's a beautiful, thoughtful response. Marlon, your comments, your story was so impactful, and Councillor Fletcher just described, and I would absolutely agree. Very, very moving. And sharing your perspective and how that impacts you, that's something for all of us to reflect on. I appreciate Sarah from Michael Guerin being on the line, and Ellis Don and our Superintendent Strobel and his team for their ongoing engagement and the work done today, but more importantly, the work that we have in the weeks and months and years ahead. There's a lot of work to do and a lot of healing to do. And we're all united in that effort. And I appreciate that our members of parliament are on the line as well. Both Nate and Julia, I appreciate that also. So we're all coming together as East Enders here to respond to this. I appreciate, that Ellis Don and Michael Guerin are on the line to answer questions. That means a lot, I think, to all of us. It's a wonderful response from our community, and I'm very grateful for that. So thanks again, Rima. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for pulling us all together.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I'm going to make a quick comment about Ministry of Labor, and then we'll go to the first question. Rima, if you'll be prepared to read it out. I want to say, folks, that for those who are not familiar with the Ministry of Labor, they have the legal responsibility of making sure that workplaces are safe and free from harassment. And last week, we contacted the Ministry of Labor to ask them to send a representative to speak this evening. We got a very insubstantial answer back, and certainly no commitment to sending anyone. On Friday, I sent an email directly to the minister outlining the issue. He's made it very clear that he is someone who opposes racism, and I thought that it would make sense for him to be here, not only to hear directly from Marlon, you, but also from this community about why this is an issue that they should be addressing, and to have them answer questions. Unfortunately, I got no response to my request, and I'll be raising that with the minister. Actually, Rima Berns-McGown and I will be raising that with the minister directly. With that, Rima, I'm going to turn it over to you for the first question.
Sure. So the first question is, what plan does the government have, or do governments have, to educate and prevent the growing concerns of racism, public discrimination, and acts of violence within the community? And if the person who wrote the question isn't specific about to whom they're aiming it, but I would actually like to mention at this point that one of the frustrations of being an MPP at Queen's Park is that we keep hearing bland bromides from the government about how they hate racism, they don't like it, they stand against it. And yet, if you look at the specifics of what they've done, none of the things they do back up that assertion. So they've actually, again, they've gutted the anti-racism directorate, whose purpose was to actually attack some of these systems. It wasn't strong enough when it was recreated after Black Lives Matter stood outside the Queen's Park a few years ago and demanded that the Premier Wynne do something. It was recreated. It had been slashed. It had been originally created under an NDP government, slashed by Mike Harris, was recreated again. But the problem was that it wasn't given teeth, and it was very easy for the government to gut it. So all of the funding that it has goes for salaries, but it has no mandate and no funding. It has basically $1,000 line item for anything that it is intended to do. You've heard the Premier say that he's not a believer in race-based data. One of the things the ARD is intended to do is collect race-based data. And I realize we have to be thoughtful and careful in how we go about doing that. But done carefully, it actually takes the burden of proof off Black community members and Indigenous and other racialized community members from proving that things happen disproportionately to them, or they don't get the kind of care that they need. And it puts the burden of proof back on the government to do stuff. So if you don't measure things, you don't know what it is you're trying to do. There are so many areas in which we've seen, I just want to mention again that poverty and homelessness, as a for instance, what these barriers do, what systemic racism does, whether it's in education, whether it's in health, whether it's in higher education, whether it's in employment, is it disproportionately makes it more difficult for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people, other people of color, to achieve the same levels of wealth, of good education, of good jobs, and of a good life as more privileged white people. And so, not surprisingly, these barriers serve to push people into poverty, into homelessness, into prisons by various mechanisms. And in order to fix these kinds of systemic racisms, we actually need to take hard looks at where racism lives in the education system, where it lives in the healthcare system, where it lives in the criminal justice system, where it lives in policing, where it lives in child welfare, where it lives in the media, which has also been getting a comeuppance on Twitter recently, but all of these things, and we need to fix each and every one of them very carefully. So it's not one quick fix, it's a series of systemic fixes, but when governments just say bland things and don't back it up with action, it doesn't mean anything, and we need to demand better.
If we could as well, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bradford, you've recently gone through the debate. Your minds have been seized of this issue. Could you also comment, please?
Yes, I will comment first by saying, Peter, that over the debate over defund the police and anti-Black racism that we spent the day on at council yesterday, there were thousands of emails from residents in the East End of Toronto simply saying, you have to act, City Council has to act and rein in anti-Black racism, in particular in the police force. So I would say that the city, we did not vote to defund, but we did vote to do many important things, including send our Auditor General in, and in particular, I think, make sure that the next chief of police, whoever that may be, has a track record in de-escalation, in understanding diverse communities, committed to anti-Black racism within the TPS. And we also started looking at, it's one thing for the TPS in dealing with the community. There is another element that's been made very clear here by Marlon, by Jeff, and that is actually anti-Black racism within the Toronto Police Service itself, amongst the 5,000 men and women. So this is a deepening conversation in our community, in all our institutions, at all of our levels of government, and it's time to have it, and I'm very happy that we're starting here tonight with everybody.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bradford, yes, please go ahead.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Rima. I would just echo those sentiments. You know, yesterday, Councillor Fletcher and myself both voted and supported a reallocation, 10% cut to the TPS budget. That wasn't a motion that passed, but I think we're at a moment and a point in Toronto and a point in our history where where people want transformative change when it comes to policing. And you know, the other side of that is we increasingly ask more and more of our police officers and send them out to do things that, frankly, you know, their services could be better spent doing else, whether we're talking about responding to mental health crises or, you know, marital disputes. There's a lot of things that they end up as a first responder for. And, you know, I think they would agree that they don't have the training. They're not best equipped to respond to those things. So, you know, that motion was really, you know, it was really about recognizing that those things need to change. And when I talk to folks over the past 4 weeks about this, you know, everybody wrestled with how do we make changes in organizations that are so big and so entrenched. That's not just policing, that's all of our institutions, all of our agencies, because racism is so fundamentally entrenched systemically in so many facets of society. And that's really tough to do. We're all engaging in that conversation right now, and we're all working towards those ends, but it doesn't happen with a singular motion, you know, at City Council. It doesn't happen with, you know, a single legislative change at Queen's Park. We have to be committed to it. We have to keep pushing forward on this, and we all have to work together to get it done.
Thank you. I have another question, and this question is for Ellis Dawn. As a Black female architect who knows very well the lack of diversity in the construction, architecture, engineering, planning industry, will Ellis Dawn follow through with their inclusivity and diversity philosophy by ensuring they introduce and hire Black, Indigenous people of color into their leading staff? We looked into this and there is little diversity. Could you please explain? Jeff, if you could speak to that.
So what I would say is that this is a big problem. The construction industry is overwhelmingly male and white, and that's got to change. We've been discussing this at some length right up to the board of directors level over the last couple of years. Obviously, a recent focus, which I don't think we had enough of before, on enough people of color, enough Black people in the industry. It's not, I don't believe, it's a complex issue. It's not, I don't believe, as simple a situation where we're going to hit a certain number of quotas in the next 2 years around Blacks, around women, around any particular group. What we've got to do is we've got to go down into the schools. We've got to reach out to the communities. We've got to attract people to the industry. Let me just tell you, it's a great industry. We do great things. It's intellectually challenging. It's fun, and it pays a lot of people a good living. What we haven't done is diversified the appeal of that industry to make people feel comfortable in it. And so they say, that's where I want to go. And so I think this is the key. If we're going to talk about how we get rid of racism, this is the key issue. How do we get to be much more inclusive? But it's about attracting people, making them feel comfortable, changing the environment. It's a road we have to start down with purpose, but it's a road. I won't be able to tell you in 6 months that the problem is solved.
Okay, thank you. Rima, do you want to take the next question?
I do. So Jeff, is another question for you. How about at the senior levels of Ellis Dawn? Like folks have a question that we have is about diversity at the senior levels, and they're saying it doesn't look so diverse at the senior levels. How can you work to change that, which might actually help change the culture within Ellis Dawn itself? And then, you know, you were saying you need things to come from the bottom up, but I also know that organizational change happens when it starts in the C-suite. So how can you do something about that?
We can make sure that we are bringing people along as quickly as possible to get into those roles. I think it is not a great idea, to be interested in other people's views, to simply say, okay, you're promoted into the C-suite because of the color of your skin or because of your gender or for any other, you know, strict, immediate, quota-based reason. If you look, and I know this won't be satisfactory to most of you, if you look at the top of Ellis Dawn, you see a bunch of white guys. No question. Not all. We've got in our executive committee, one person of color, 2 women. We're getting there. If you look in the middle and bottom levels of Ellis Don, it's much more diverse. If you look at who we're hiring, it's much more diverse. I know that's not fast enough for people. It's an issue of how fast can we bring people along? How fast can we bring them into the industry, as opposed to just tokenism. I get you. I get you that it's too white and male at the top of Ellis Don. 6 months from now, it's going to be too white and male at the top of Ellis Don, but hopefully 2 or 3 years from now, you'll see change. All I can tell you is I'm determined to do that, but it's you've just got to really work hard to bring people along.
Jeff, do you mind if I come in? And Rima, do you mind?
No, actually,
in fact, Samuel, I'll take all the help I can get on this point.
No, Mr. Jobo, if you could speak. Yes, please.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you to everybody for organizing this. This is very amazing, and I want to say thank you. First of all, what I wanted to say is when I heard Marlon actually said, quote for quote, he said, it was an unfortunate situation that created division. It was demoralizing. It was demeaning, and it was a shock in the moment. And I was trying to find a reason. And when I take this back and look at a case that happened in a construction site in San Francisco in 2018, and there were 3 guys in a site, and there were 3 baby dolls that were actually hanged with a noose. It was actually black dolls. It's touching because you also hear them say, it made me feel hurt, it made me feel angry, it made me feel scared, and I was very scared for my own safety. And what I want to touch on, because is really on the fact of, it's like a deja vu. It's happening again and again and again. And when I see Marlon with his daughter, because I have a little daughter myself, and I could see the fact of that fear of safety, I could only imagine how tough this is for him. So first of all, I would say thank you for coming in here to speak. And also the fact of, you said something that were critical, because I heard your story and we've been talking about your story, and it's amazing what we are doing in Ellis Don to ensure that something like this doesn't happen. But what I want to point out on is seeing your family and see how this could have affected and actually did affect you. It's actually imperative to say, you said something, which is, what is the way forward? You know, in terms of how do we push this forward? How do we create a change? How do we pass on the knowledge? And for me, one thing I've actually said to a lot of people, including Jeff Smith and our team in Ellis Don, in terms of anti-racism and in terms of inclusive diversity, is the fact of Ellis Don is working hard to actually work on taking responsibility. And I'm saying this, that the fault is obvious. The fault is in the history. We know that, and everybody is very aware of that. And Ellis Don is saying, we want to take responsibility bottom up. And what Jeff is saying to that point is the fact of, we are going to be changing the default in Ellis Don and how this has affected the industry and how this has affected our people. And people like Marlon, people like myself, and people like the indigenous community, the LGBTQ community, the women in our society, and also for that lady and the person that asked about why is it that women in architecture, you know, they want the exposure in the industry. We're gonna be changing this, and you want to know the steps. And the fact is, I can tell you this, that we have taken the responsibility of actually taking action internally, discussing these things, actually taking the knowledge from the people affected, not people that just think they can just make the decision and tell you what you need to eat or what you need to hear. No, we are actually taking these feedbacks, we are taking it back, we are actually talking about it, going out to people, seeing how they are feeling. People like Marlon, we want to hear those stories, we want to know those things, we want to get in touch, knowing how you're feeling and coming back to say, this is what you need, and this is how we're going to approach it to get there for you and with you. And in that sense, lastly, I want to say this is the key thing is, somebody said, how do we move forward for the change? One of the things I want to say is, go out and share what you're hearing out today. Go out and share these messages with your kids. go out there. I'm going to go home and tell my daughter in the best way of what change is going to be coming up for our generation. I want you to go out and share that hope to the people and know that people like Ellis Dunn, we're going to be working out to ensure that construction is enticing to people of every color, every race, every age, every gender. And that is key because I want my daughter to grow up and say, I can work in construction too. And that is going to be happening. And trust me, as Jeff said, a lot of initiatives are going to be rolling out. And you can surely go on our Ellis Dunn website, on LinkedIn and everywhere, and you're going to be seeing those initiatives coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Samuel, I was just asked to note that you're an engineer at Ellis Dunn, and we appreciate your speaking today. Rima, you had wanted to go forward.
I just did want to mention that I think we might have time for one more question, and then we'll move to the community, to Zara. So we're going to go past 8:30. So just everybody know that there will be time for community input. So this is actually a question for Ruben Strobel. Marlon noted that it will be difficult to trust his co-workers now, not knowing who amongst them is responsible for the hate crime. How can we, the public, trust the police to investigate and lay appropriate hate crime charges against those responsible for this heinous act when the police force is itself replete with anti-Black racism, and when officers responsible for crimes against Black, Indigenous, Brown, and poor people go unpunished?
Well, I mean, all I can say to you, I mean, our whole relationship with the policing relationship with the community is built on trust. And, you know, for us, we have to earn that trust every day in which we do our job. And I would hope that the investigator that you have been dealing with personally and investigating your particular situation, you're able to build a level of trust with that officer to feel safe in which to tell your story and believe that they're going to do their job. I mean, as a police service, we do hold our people accountable. We hold our investigators accountable. I have a management meeting every morning where we talk about cases and making sure that cases are investigated fully. In this particular case, as I was saying earlier, we have taken it very, very seriously to the point that we've reached out to the Crown's office and we've also met with our intelligence unit to get that designation for a hate crime. So I can only say to you that as individuals, you have to trust us to do that job, and we'll be held accountable to do that job. And it's important that we build that trust with you first and foremost, and hopefully that will translate to other people so you can say, you know, and talk about your positive experience that you've had with the Toronto Police Service. I don't want to, you know, to say that a lot of, you know, people have had bad experiences with police, and, you know, we're acknowledging that, and we still have a long way to building the bridges with the Black community and Indigenous community and other racialized groups. And so I really don't know what else to say to you other than to trust in us and trust that we will do a good job and hopefully satisfy you as a customer, but more importantly, find those responsible who did this crime to you personally and to your coworkers.
So I just want to be clear that question wasn't from Marlon. That question was it from a community member?
Oh, I thought it was from Marlon. So I apologize.
No, it wasn't. It was saying that Marlon said that the incident created mistrust, and the question was from the perspective of community. How can we as community trust? So just to be perfectly clear.
Yes, thank you.
Peter?
Rima, I was going to suggest, because we're running low on time, and I think people are interested in going to so what do we do now? I'd ask that you lead off as we had discussed earlier.
Yeah, so thank you. So I would like at this point, I think we could stay and usefully ask questions for a long while, but time is passing. And so I do want to open the floor, give the floor to Zara Danani, who is co-owner of the Mom and Mom Old School General Store, which is just the beating heart of East York, and just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful community space. Zara is also the heart of anti-racism work in East York, and has both collected the thoughts of community members and articulates them brilliantly, pulled them together, is responsible for that amazing Artivism site at the hospital. So Zara, if you would please give us the benefit of your thoughts in kicking off this section of the forum, I'd be grateful.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you for having me. First, let me just start by saying to Marlon and the other worker who also found the noose with you, everything we did was to show you that we care about your life and that you matter to us, and that we are devastated that you walked into work and you found a symbol that talks about murdering Black people. It is heinous what you experienced. It's outrageous, and unfortunately, it's not shocking. You know, Jeff, Mr. Smith, I wish I had the privilege of saying that I want to learn now. I've known about racism since I was 3 years old in a schoolyard, getting the shit kicked out of me by white kids. Okay? I've been an activist for 35 years on issues of orientation, ableism, because I live these realities. And so I've never had the privilege to just start thinking about these things now. And I say this with utmost respect, Mr. Smith, but when you create an organization where the top level 50 people, 50, we were sent a picture, are all white, what you are saying, Mr. Smith, is that the only people who are competent to lead, the only people who are capable enough to lead, the only people who are intelligent enough to lead are white people. And let me tell you that that message leads directly into a noose hanging in your construction site. It is a continuum. Hate crimes are a continuum. From the racist remark, which I'll tell you, I'm a business owner. If I hear a racist remark in my business, it gets dealt with immediately. And I'm talking about innocuous statements. I'm talking about microaggressions where white people take up too much space, or where white people say things and ask people of color to do the labor for them. You might not have noticed it, but in this call alone, I've seen so much of the centering of doing the work of anti-racism, and specifically anti-Black racism, being put on Black people. Okay? 30 years ago, Mr. Smith, you should have been encouraging people of all different nationalities and genders and sexual orientations to enter the construction world to clean it up and to make it better. Not now in 2020 when there's the first reported noose on your site. The thing is that with hate crimes, of 1,000 hate crimes a year, 1 gets reported. 1 of the thousands. Mr. Smith, I experience hate crimes on a daily basis for my identity. And let me tell you about a hate crime. The hate crime tells you that there's something very wrong at the core of your being. Your existence is wrong and it should be wiped out. People who commit hate crimes are saying that because of your identity, you deserve to be murdered. Okay, do you understand what that means for me as a queer woman of color, that I'm constantly being told every day that I shouldn't exist? Okay, and let me just contextualize this also. Mr. Smith, I have 3 university degrees. I'm a lawyer and I have a master's in law. I've practiced as a lawyer. I've worked in government. I've worked in not-for-profits, and I've worked in all forms of legal arenas. And I have seen the most mediocre white people get promoted, get raises, get bonuses, get accolades. And I have often not only been set back, but told that what I'm doing is wrong or that I'm not good enough. In fact, I once went through a hiring process where there was a 4-stage hiring process. I had to write 3 exams and I did it all. I went through a panel of interviews with 4, 5, 6 people. And then I didn't get the job. And you know what they told me, Mr. Smith? They said to me that we didn't think that someone who looks like you represents the Canadian government. Okay, this is what I get told on a regular, everyday basis. And I want to say that the nooses represent the fact that of all hate crimes in our country, the most happen towards Black people. 40% more hate crimes than any other hate crime happen against Black people. And that is why we are centering Black lives. We didn't go to Michael Garron Hospital and do that activism where we didn't sleep for a week. You know, we love the hospital, it's great. We're grateful. We did it to wrap love around Black people. We centered Black people. And that's what we do as community. I don't know, Mr. Smith, and I'm speaking to you directly because you said specifically, I'm open to education. So I'm here, you know, we're called old school. We're about schooling people. We're about spreading information and education. And I want people in white lives to ask themselves, are you going to the cottage this weekend? Does that mean you have a second home on top of the $1 million home you already live in while people in this city don't have somewhere to live? That's concrete action. That's concrete. Don't give me a statement. Don't say politically nice things. Put your money where your mouth is. You know, don't ask all the Black people in your organization to do all the work on racism. Educate yourselves on white supremacy and white privilege, and you do the work. The 50 executives who are probably making over $500,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, whatever it is, when there's people in the world today who are making less than minimum wage, when you look at undocumented workers, when you look at the bottom layer of the people in the organization where you're at the top of the food chain, Mr. Smith, you are the leader. You are the top dog. And I just really want you to understand that this responsibility of racism on construction sites is on you. You're a leader in the industry. You're known as this great partner to hospitals. It's on you, Mr. Smith. We are exhausted. We are tired. Community members came to me, and this was last week, and they said, we are shouting our heads off to get some attention about these nooses. I didn't know. Within a day, we had an action and people were on it. The community was on it. The most phenomenal revolutions I've seen in the world come from community action that is unpaid. We don't have to wait 3 weeks for a meeting to happen for us all to make a decision when it's a convenient time on a Google calendar. Things just get done in community. You know, I just really want to be clear here that the message from the community is enough is enough. We're tired of lip service. You know, a statement that we support anti-Black racism is fine, but talk is cheap. I've been doing this for 30 years and I've heard those statements for 30 years. The man who put the noose up in the construction site, we now know from informal channels, is known. And not only is he known, he's still working in construction. He just got placed in another site. He hasn't been fired. He hasn't been put on leave. There was no economic insecurity that he experienced from this absolutely dangerous, violent crime. He is a harm to other people, and he's still working. He's still working. You're exposing other Black people to him. So today's conversation was actually, I wasn't going to come on saying these things, but I felt so pained by what I was hearing because there was nothing concrete around, I am going to do this, this, and this, and this to change the industry. I am going to do this to center Black lives. And that's what we want to see. We want to see action centering Black lives. We want white people to do the work. We want white people to stop making Black people do the work. That's just another manifestation of slavery. You know, you can't hire people of color at really low paid jobs to do the hardest jobs for the rest of millennia. So what we want moving forward and what can be done moving forward is we want the lip service to stop. We want to see people of color, racialized people, Black people, Indigenous people, queer people, disabled people in executive positions across the country. In the hospital, at Ellis Dawn, in every single trade union. We want the discrimination and prejudice to stop, and the only people who can stop that are the discriminators, are the people with the prejudice, are the people who hear racist comments from other white people and don't call them on it. So, I'm sorry. I might have gone on longer than I was supposed to. I wasn't timing myself. I wasn't timing, but clearly, you know, after a week of not sleeping and being exhausted and wondering, you guys have known about this for 2.5 weeks. Why isn't that guy in jail? Why isn't that guy doing time? Why hasn't a hate crime been, why is he still working? Why is he still working? You know, a black person gets pulled over for not having their license and they get shot. White people get away with murder. Stop it. Stop. Enough is enough.
Thank you, Zara.
Thank you, Zara. Thank you so much. Powerful, powerful, powerful words. And I think that what Zara had to say is exactly what I was alluding to in my opening comments. People are tired of bromides. They're tired of the words that don't come with action. And I know that it's difficult to hear, but it's really important that absolutely everybody who is in a position of power in a C-suite, it doesn't matter what corporation, it doesn't matter what organization, that everybody steps up to make the kinds of really foundational changes that Zara was talking about. There was one other person whom Zara wanted to have speak, and that would be a leader, another leader in the community named Astrid Jacques. And Astrid, if you're there, can you unmute yourself and let us know what thoughts you have? Okay.
Hi, I actually don't want to take up too much time because, I mean, the one thing I do want to say is this. It took about 2 weeks to get any movement on this. So, which is shocking to me. So I actually learned about this from a friend who lives in Ottawa, who sent me a CBC article to tell me what's going on in your community. And from then on, I contacted local politicians to understand what's happening, what's going on. Are we going to have a forum? What steps are actually going to be taken to address this? And basically, it really took a community effort for this to happen. It took a community effort for the art activism to happen. It basically, again, falls on community to make sure that what needs to happen actually happens, which is actually unacceptable. So when I hear everything that I just heard tonight, I'm shocked. I'll be honest, I'm actually quite shocked because I know the labor that it took to just get this done. And then when this gets done, this is what happens. Now, don't get me wrong. We wanted the updates. I wanted the updates. But as Zara was saying, since apparently Ellis Dawn knows who probably did this, why are charges not laid? And don't tell me it's a union issue, because organizations take on unions all the time. So I don't know. I mean, is this a rumor? Is it that you can't? So, but this is what we're hearing, that we know who did this and they were moved to another site. So to me, that's extremely disturbing if in fact that is true. But I really just wanted to set the record straight about tonight, and other actions like the art activism, it was labor intensive. And this is not a fad. This is not, you know, we're not here just like for the flavor of the month. We are going to be watching everything. So that's one thing I really wanted to say. And I think it's really important that you hear the community voices. And I see that Soraya has her hand up and she wants to say something. You need to listen to her and you need to listen to the community instead of patting each other on the back.
Thank you so much, Astrid. Thank you. Soraya, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, the police, I'm not sure if we have the police, someone from the police department here. So you ask and how we could build relationship and trust. You need to find the person who did it. And you heard right now, that person exists and they move him another side. That's how you build the relationship. That's how you build the trust. That's how you start, not only lip services or sending the neighborhood officer in the community. We build the relationship, and then another monster comes, they kill another Black person in the community. That's how you move back, and it's kind of tug wars. If you are not really doing a jobs, you need to do it really. The job that you say you could be dignified and you go home and sleep with your family. I'm sick and tired of saying mellow and lip services. I'm sick and tired of it. We are tired, we are exhausted, we are sick. And if you say that your skin of your color that makes you better, you are not human being. You need to see yourself, what you are doing as a human being, like all in levels. You see that, you mentioned from the hospital, we are not putting for the skill of their colors. Listen, we have qualified Black people, the same credential, we have it everywhere. But you just sucking the power, and you stay on your power, you clinking your power, you don't wanna anybody. That's how you intimidate Black people also in all construction site. And they are qualified, they are capable of doing better than anybody else that could do. But if you guys are doing, this is a time you need to change. And this is a time, if any of you could stand up as a human being and do the job, this is now. And I don't want to come back again and happening again and then vicious cycle. And I don't want my son tomorrow and to fight the same cause that we are fighting right now. I'm sorry to go all over, but I'm just very angry and what is happening here.
No, I can understand why you would be very angry and very frustrated. I've sent a note to you, Rima. Can I ask if you're agreeable? If Jeff Smith and Ruben Strobel could briefly respond to the statements that were made, and I think we're running out of time and should wrap up. Jeff, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Just to let everybody know and be very clear here. As I said earlier, we are conducting a criminal investigation. It's an in-depth criminal investigation. We have conducted many, many interviews speaking with people directly about this incident. And I got to tell you, and I'm just speaking with the investigator, this is news to us that there's been a person identified. So if Zara knows who this person is through her informal channels, then we would like to know that, because we, the Toronto Police Service, who are leading this investigation, do not know who this person is, nor was this person told to us. So we would appreciate that assistance from the community to help us solve this crime. Because it's the only way we're going to solve it.
Ask the community, include the community, ask us. Sometimes the community on the ground knows way more than anyone else, because we've got channels. We talk to each other. Talk to us.
Well, like I said, more than happy to get your information. And if you have the person identified and you can point that person out to us and lead us to build a case, then we'll welcome it.
Thank you. Jeff Smith, would you like to speak?
I don't know who did it. I know there are rumors out there. I'm not aware of any evidence that, you know, I'm just not aware of any evidence or any facts that would lead one to be able to say, or lead me, or lead the superintendent, or lead anybody. If those, as the superintendent just said, if the facts are there, then by all means bring them forward. But I don't know who did it, and I can't say, well, because there's a rumor, and because there's even a consensus that that person is therefore deprived. Listen, if we convict somebody and we know and we can prove somebody did this, I'll do everything I can to run that person out of the industry. But I'm sorry, I have to say that I can't run somebody out of the industry, and I can't ask the unions to do that based on rumors and a lack of facts. So I'm sorry, and you wouldn't want that done to yourself or your sons or spouses. So I'm sorry. I know the rumors are there. I know what you're speaking of. I'm just not aware of any facts that can back them up. And I know the police are investigating. We're cooperating. We've had our own separate investigating firm working on it. They're still working on it. They've interviewed everybody they can find. They've been to the site, I think, 5 times in the last 2 weeks. I don't agree that we didn't jump on this right at the beginning. It's just very, very difficult when there was nobody around, or there appears to be nobody around when the crime was committed. And that's all I can really say about that. Zara, I just want you to know I agree with about 95% of what you said. I agree with you I don't agree with every nasty thing you said about me, but I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I don't want to make light of anything. But I want you to know that I really agree with you when you said, where were you 30 years ago? And not making sure these problems were solved, because here we are 30 years later and you didn't do it. And if it wasn't me, then it should have been my father or something. I get that. And when I said to you earlier, and said to everybody earlier in this conversation, this has been a time of great learning for me, I'm not letting myself off the hook. And I'm also agreeing with you that I had the white privilege to not be aware of this stuff. I'm not excusing myself. I'm not ducking accountability. I'm just acknowledging the fact it is what it is. I just want you to know that I agree with most of what you said. The one thing that I don't think, Zara, you and I will, maybe we will get to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it with the Black employees of Ellis Don, and with the Black employees of the people working in the construction industry, about who's going to do the work. Your point, your thing, stop asking us to do the work. I'm just sitting here learning and thinking, I can't imagine not having Samuel involved. He can speak for himself. He's a smart guy, but I can't imagine not having him involved in the work and helping to do the work. I'll do the work, but we need his help, and that's Samuel. It means work, and Marlon too. We need you guys to get in and help with this work, because having me do all the work, or a bunch of all the white males at Ellis Don do the work, I just don't see how that's the entire solution. So anyway, I'm going to have these conversations, and we'll figure it out. But I'm saying to Marlon, and I'm saying to Samuel, and I'm saying to the other Black members of the construction community, I hope you will do some work, and I hope you'll work with us. And Zara, I hope you're not upset by that. But it's the only thing that I was thinking when you were talking. I think we really need them involved doing the work. I'm sorry if you disagree with me.
Jeff, thank you very much for that. Rima, we've come to the end, I think. I would like to make some comments, but I'd like you to have the last word. I think that's fitting. I'd like to thank everyone who took part this evening, our panelists, and all of you who've joined in and spoken so well. This is never going to be an easy, smooth, or entirely happy conversation. It's the nature of our society. It's going to be contentious, and sometimes we'll hit the mark and sometimes we don't. But if we don't have the open discussion, and if people don't at some point get upset, we're probably missing the point. So I want to thank everyone who took part in this, and I hope that there is some real progress on this case. I'm not assuming it's an easy case. I just hope there's progress on it. And in a larger way, I hope we're able to do in our society what we need to do to ensure that everyone can live a peaceful and decent life. And with that, I turn it over to Rima.
Thank you so very much, Peter. And I also want to, again, as I started, thank everybody for showing up and for being willing to listen and for engaging in incredibly difficult conversations. These conversations are going to get harder. They are not going to get easier. And everybody is going to be forced to put aside pretty words and actually dig deep and actually begin to act. Everybody in any position of power. Zara's key point that I hope everybody took home is that this is not going to change if we keep asking Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people to do the work. It is only going to change when white folks also recognize that the change is theirs to make. And change in organizations, as much as it's important to listen to everybody, they start at the top. It's the only way it ever does, because otherwise culture trumps strategy every time. So whether it's government, whether it's not-for-profits, whether it's for-profit corporations, whether it's organizations like policing, there has to be a shakeup that is so completely foundational. And that's what people mean when they talk about defunding. It's what they mean when they talk about abolishing. They mean changing what exists into something that we haven't yet imagined. Imagined it, co-created it so that it works for everybody. Because if it doesn't work for all of us, it doesn't work for any of us. And it's so, that is not just a slogan, that is really something we all need to take to heart and we need to act on concretely. There is no way to have these conversations and pretend that emotions aren't there. People are traumatized and they're exhausted. Like Zara, I have been working on this stuff since I was a kid. As light-skinned as I am, I was read as Black in my high school, in my elementary school, and I have been experiencing systemic racism as well as the casual kind ever since. It's why I do this work. So I absolutely understand when you are getting people out in the streets again and again and again and again and again. People are exhausted, but they put themselves out there because they need everybody to listen. So I hope that everybody takes this home and thinks concretely, what can I do? What can I do to change the upper echelons? What can I do to change the culture? What can I do to rid it of racism, of anti-Black racism, of anti-Indigenous racism? What can I actually concretely do? And I also, I think, need everybody to really think about when we have a limited amount of collective resources and the lion's share of them is going to institutions that are seen to be harming Black and Indigenous people, that's not setting anyone up for success. And we need to reimagine that, and we need to stop being defensive about it. And we need to really think, for all our collective sakes, how can we make that work? So thank you again so very much for coming here tonight and for being willing to listen and for speaking. And I think everybody's got some thinking to do, and it isn't going to be the last time we have difficult conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good evening, folks, and happy Canada Day tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Night.
Good night. And thank you again from the bottom of our hearts.